All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our CommScope webinar. I'm Andrea Bennett, with Executive Director with SITE, California IT and Education. And with us today is Eric Heinrich of CommScope, and I'm going to let Eric introduce himself. He's a CTO mentor grad and very appreciative of you being a SITE member, Eric. And thanks so much for doing this webinar today.
Oh, thanks, Andrea. I appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for joining. I know everybody has other things they could be doing, so I appreciate you guys joining us. I did spend a little bit of time in the public sector working for schools. I worked for San Francisco Unified. I've gone through the CTO mentor program, and I really think this is such an important, we have such an important role in helping make these changes and connecting kids. And so that's kind of the premise of what we're going to talk about today. I work for CommScope. We have the Ruckus product line that you're all familiar with. Most people are familiar with as Wi-Fi in schools. And I do business development. I'm also the education subject matter expert, and I'm on the board at Shelby, the school's health and library broadband organization. And I say all that to provide just a little bit of context around where this information comes from, and hopefully you'll find it useful. I don't intend for this to be a sales presentation as much as giving you some ideas around what's possible in solving what we're seeing in schools today. So for many years, as I've been presenting on these topics, largely on digital equity, you've probably, if you've been to any one of my sessions or other sessions from Ruckus, you've heard us talking about how there's this move to digital learning, right? And it's not something new. It's been going on for many years. And with the pandemic, we have kind of accelerated that trajectory of that path because it's no longer an optional, nice to have sort of solution. If you think about how we used to connect students, even with their devices, we would have these carts, and we would, share the carts and roll them down the hallways because it wasn't something that was needed 100% of the time. Every student did not necessarily have their own device. And so we used to say that, over 50% of curriculum was going to be digital. And what's interesting is that even when we would say it at that time, I was surprised because I thought that we had already achieved that for the last several years, but many schools had not made that shift. They were still clinging on to textbooks and paper and pencil kind of curriculum, kind of scared to make that leap. Well, now we're just kind of flashing forward, moving forward at light speed, and adopting these new mechanisms because we were forced to do that. And the road, admittedly has been bumpy, but I think what has come to the forefront is that this is something that's going to stick around. It's not something that is temporary anymore, and it's not just a nice to have. So with the pandemic, I thought it would be helpful to put some things in context. For those of you who are at schools, working at schools, this is probably something that you're familiar with and is the new reality. And this was a survey done of 5,000 educational institutional professionals around that, and that includes superintendents, educators, and administration all throughout, right? And they were asking them, what are the things that you're really going to be focused on? What are the challenges that you're going to be focused on? And what I found interesting is that these first three are not things that we typically try to prepare for prior to the pandemic, right? These are all new. Worrying about cleaning your campus, short of having the custodial staff, right? Worrying about your cafeteria being cleaned. This is a different kind of cleaning. This is disinfecting. This is really making sure that everything is sanitary for this health and safety of the students and the faculty as well. The second one is masks and temps. This is the PPE kind of concerns, right? To make sure that we have the gear and the equipment that is needed to keep people safe during a pandemic. And then finally, buses, this transportation issue. As we try to keep enough students separated, do I have enough school buses? How am I going to organize that transportation? These are three things that we've never really had, and you can now see how they've moved all the way to the front of the chart as the top concerns that people are dealing with. Of course, we have others. There's the academic slide and all the others that follow. But I thought it was very interesting to see these brand new issues. Academic slide is something we always worried about over the summer to make sure students stayed engaged and some didn't fall behind. But these first three are all brand new. So what are the strategies that they're employing to deal with these things? We wanted to take a look at that as well. And no surprise, they're going to use the first ones are around those top three issues, right? We're going to keep that distancing by staggering schedules, lowering the population in school at any given time, maybe opening in phases. We have the youngest kids coming in first and eventually going to get to the high school students, depending on how your school district is approaching this. We have cleaning with UV lights. But the three areas that I want to focus on today are areas that I think that that we can help with, and we have some great stories to talk about that we think are illustrative of approaches that you can consider yourselves as well. The first one being reducing the class size and limiting contact. This is that physical distancing. This is pretty kind of core to reopening schools. We're going to continue to see the online learning options, right? This is probably the one topic that has been talked about the most, both from the benefits as well as the challenges, which are in no short supply. Lots of challenges around doing this. And then finally, outdoor time or fresh air, use of spaces, areas that can help support some of those first few things about social distancing. So these are going to be the three kind of main topics along this slide that we're going to talk about. So that first one is physical distancing, that yellow bar, talking about reducing class sizes, limiting contact. This is kind of central to what every school is going to be doing. And I chose this picture because this is kind of how a lot of us have been feeling at home, connecting via Zoom. We really desire to be out there and reconnecting with our students, reconnecting with our friends, families, colleagues, everyone out there, right? So it's been a little bit sad, and hopefully we are starting to turn that corner and feeling hopeful about going back, but we still need to be safe as we do that. So in this top section, we're thinking about how are we going to space out your furniture? We have to promote that distancing, whether it's in the cafeteria like you see in this picture or whether it's in a classroom. Students are still going to need to be connected. That digital learning is still going to be happening on campus as well as at home, whether it's in this hybrid mode of either in person or at home. It's still going to be often digital, right? We're using those digital resources far more. And so Wi-Fi is not something new. We've been doing that in schools for some time, and that really has allowed us to connect without being tethered, right? And so this is the same thing. By spacing things out, we still need to make sure everybody is connected, and we do that through wireless technologies. This really helps people move about. We also see that in the labs. So no more sitting elbow to elbow with your other student peers in those labs. Those labs have been going away slowly but surely, and maybe now this is again the catalyst for updating how we do that. If you look in the picture, I find it really interesting. We've seen a lot of schools adopting multiple different kind of seating arrangements. If you have an area around to sit your students in a circle, that's kind of what they call the campfire setting, right? And that's used typically to exchange stories, see each other face to face in a large group. But you might have, as you see this student sitting in this kind of chair that has an umbrella coverage that goes over it, they call it a pod. And it's kind of what they call a cave. And that's for really deep focused individual thinking, as well as things like a couch so that there's a comfort area that people are familiar with being like at home. And then perhaps high boy tables, something like a coffee shop, right? Something that you might experience if you were in a coffee shop. So we're trying to give students this kind of comfort that they might experience in these other kinds of spaces that aren't the typical desks and rows facing forward. And it's still considered the technology or computer lab. But again, not sitting elbows to elbow and not sharing equipment. We're also seeing a lot more of one-to-one, spacing the students out, again, not sharing things, and making sure that we're not touching things and exchanging those as well, because that's still a concern, right? So a lot more one-to-one. And the technologies you see down on the bottom of this slide are just an example of some of those technologies. This is one that I wanted to call out because the last time I mentioned it, I had more questions about this or interest in this than just about anything else that I've talked about. So there was an interesting statistic that said that upwards of 30% of the devices, laptops or student devices and teacher devices that were handed out during the pandemic, we saw pictures of cars pulling up in parking lots. and organizations, schools handing devices out through the window to these folks in cars. And so that way they would have a device for their remote learning. But somewhere between 20 and 30% of these devices have never been on the school network. So they've handed these out in a rush to make sure these kids were connected. What happens when those devices come back to school? So to get that device on the network, if you are an IT person like myself, this is perhaps your worst nightmare, right? A deluge of devices coming on campus that all need to be joined to the network. The number one type of service or support ticket is always about, I can't get on the Wi-Fi, right? It's understandable because it's probably the most commonly used technology that IT supports. And it is something that is user dependent. So the user has to usually do something to get the device on the network. So what we've tried to do is we have a tool that's run in the cloud. So that device is now sitting at somebody's home. The school can simply send that student an email or even a letter in the mail, which has a URL or a hyperlink in it. When they access that hyperlink, they simply go on the device they were given to that URL, they type that in, and they will receive a link via the cloud with 3 easy steps. They put in some basic criteria. They click one of 2 options. Is this a personal device or is this issued by your school? They put in their student name and password or ID, and they accept the terms and conditions on that last step. What that does is it's delivered a little digital certificate. Think of it like the SIM card in your phone. When you use your phone, you never have to log into the AT&T or Verizon network, and yet it authenticates you on their network. If you are a member of Verizon, you don't jump onto the AT&T network, right? It automatically connects you to your Verizon network, and it just works. Well, that's the same experience that we deliver by delivering a digital certificate, the same type of technology that the banks use to secure your connection when you are doing banking online. So when that device goes to that campus on day 1, it will see it's already been pre-configured by that certificate to connect to the student network or the appropriate network, and that certificate authenticates it on the network automatically. So there's no user intervention at that point. There's no IT intervention at that point. And it's all becomes encrypted traffic because of that certificate, all automatically through the acceptance of that one hyperlink and 3 clicks. So this is something I recommend to people to check out if they have issued a number of devices over the break, or plan to distribute more one-to-one devices on their school. This really, really simplifies the process. It also secures the transactions as well, because now all the traffic from that laptop to the network is encrypted automatically. Nobody had to install any special keys or any special security software. That is done through that certificate automatically, let's say. So we also have seen a huge demand for some of these other products, indoor and outdoor Wi-Fi, which we'll talk about in a moment, because of course connectivity is key. As you spread students out with their own devices, they still need to be connected. So you might have to expand the coverage within your campus, maybe into the quad area or other public areas, to make sure that you're taking advantage of that space. But IT needs to be cautious as well. We don't want adults or anyone from the IT department coming in and out of the building, campus buildings, if it's unnecessary, both for their own health and safety and for mitigating risk and to meet compliance requirements for each individual campus. Well, you can do that by managing your network remotely from the cloud. We're seeing huge adoption of cloud technologies, not just for Ruckus Cloud, but obviously you're seeing things like Google and Microsoft all moving to the cloud. And you'll see additional benefits from doing that with your networking as well. The last piece of health and safety that I want to mention is that before we were in a pandemic, we had an epidemic, and that was vaping on campus. And there are other health and safety issues. And so at Ruckus, we were making sure that we were working with some of these environmental sensor companies. In the case of vaping, it is considered a pre-existing condition, right? So this is a condition that could worsen the outcomes if you were to catch the coronavirus or any severe lung illness. Vaping or some sort of condition like that could exacerbate that. And so we had partnered with a company that allowed us to plug in sensors into the network, and they would send an alert and allow you to know that somewhere someone is vaping in an area that maybe you can't have cameras or you don't have staff. So we have a number of different tools available to help you maintain the safety and wellness of your students on campus. So that second blue bar, about the middle of that first chart, that was offering online learning. And distance learning and online learning, many different names, but ultimately very similar. The idea is that you're going to be doing some level of teaching over remote connections, right? The student needs to be accessing things that are typically going to be in the cloud somewhere, right? So some sort of connectivity is going to be needed. And we think that the hybrid approach, or I am certain that the hybrid approach is not going to go away, no matter what happens with COVID-19. That this is the paradigm that we are in, where some learning will be taking place online, some learning will be taking place on campus. They are both valid. They both have needs. Different students will hopefully be receiving a more personalized learning approach. Some might have more online, some might have more in person, depending on their needs. But this also means more use of video conferencing. We've already seen that video conferencing skyrocket. We believe that video will be the #1 type of network traffic within the next year, right? So we're getting very close to where video traffic is taking over the entire communication methodology of the internet. And that has some implications around that use. And one in particular that schools will notice, I think, very quickly is that if we accept that hybrid learning is going, or the hybrid approach is going to be the way that we continue to do things moving forward, there will be teachers who will be broadcasting from their classroom. This is because perhaps those teachers do not have those same resources. If you think of a chemistry teacher trying to teach chemistry from home, they may not have all of the chemistry equipment in their home. So they may want to broadcast that from a classroom. And they may want to do it live so that they can engage with their students at home. However, in a modern network, in school networks for years, including when I was at San Francisco Unified, we really prioritized download traffic. If you think of your home internet connection, typically the download speeds that are offered by your local service provider are much higher than your upload speeds, because this was under the impression that everybody's going to be downloading content, but not broadcasting content. And that's really been flipped on its head. This is going to be challenging for not only network providers like service providers, but schools as well, because they've built their networks for downstream traffic. Now we're going to suddenly face bottlenecks in trying to broadcast that traffic, upstream traffic. And so we're encouraging schools to look at and look for those bottlenecks and how to eliminate them. Of course, along with that, everybody's adopting that cloud curriculum in much greater quantities than we were in the past. There are so many things as a service that I don't think there's anything you can't buy as a service these days. And I think that's just natural. That's going to continue as well. And as you do that, you need to, again, make sure that you have the capacity and the reliability, because if all your services are now require a network connection, that network connection is not nice to have. It is an absolute must. And then the last one that I think I personally have an interest in, I got my start in video game companies as a young person going into technology, and I could not be happier than to see what's happening with esports. First and foremost, because esports is really about equity. It's really about diversity. It's embracing all of those things. So if you think about it and you go into a classroom and you ask the students, how many of you are on the varsity football team? You're going to get a very small subset of students in any given class that raises their hands, because it's only those who are able to achieve athletically at the top, smallest percentage of your student body. And they are limited typically by age, which is class, the classes that they're in, their age, as well as gender, right? We don't yet have, in most schools, we don't have cross-gender kind of athletics. Esports breaks these barriers. Esports says it doesn't matter whether you are male or female, whether you're 12 or you're 16, whether you are disabled, physically disabled in some manner, or even have other impairments, that you cannot participate. There's no reason, right? So this becomes an inclusion play that I think is really important. And if you go into that same classroom that you asked about varsity football and you ask how many of you play video games, I guarantee you're going to get 70% of the students raise their hands in almost any class today, right? So you now have a much greater opportunity to bring students together and form a sense of community. And students who may not have felt valued in the past, where we really value varsity sports, now those same students are going to be able to be valued for their esports play. And of course, we now see a lot of scholarships in higher education as well. So in order to do these things, on the Ruckus portfolio that I'll touch on in our Wi-Fi, what has made us so famous over the years is the ability to prioritize voice and video. We believe that you can have text that pops up in any order and still read the text. But if I have a conversation with you and I transmit words out of order, we've broken that communication. It doesn't make sense. Similarly with video, stop, stuttering, freezing, these all break the experience. So at Ruckus, we have a patented technology that automatically notices what is video and voice traffic, and it automatically prioritizes that traffic over all other types of traffic that is not as sensitive to those types of delays. Of course, the copper and fiber cabling, it's been very interesting on many listservs I'm reading that what we used to think of as a commodity, it's just cabling, you can get it from anybody, has actually taken, has significantly gone up in appreciation for the fact that in order to achieve the speeds that are promised of a technology, the underlying cabling, the foundation, has to be there. And so we're seeing many more schools finally updating cabling that maybe hadn't been updated in decades. And then of course the switching, this again comes to the downlink and uplink that I mentioned. The ability to broadcast, you have to make sure that the switching, the physical infrastructure on the back end can enable that. And we've developed kind of a customized type of solution specifically for these types of use cases that I would encourage you guys to check out within your own infrastructure and then learn more about from CommScope Ruckus staff. This is the last section. This is the third and last that's about use of outdoor space. When the pandemic hit, one of the first things schools did was close. So that one place that students always knew they could get access is no longer available to them. We saw the news, students sitting outside of in a parking lot at a McDonald's or a Starbucks connecting just to get onto the Wi-Fi because they didn't have it at home. Schools used to be that place for them to go to get connected, and they couldn't do that. So one of the first things schools did, they set up what we've been calling drive-fi, right? Drive up Wi-Fi. Pull into the parking lot and connect. The school still has a network, but not all schools had Wi-Fi connectivity out in the parking lots. So outdoor Wi-Fi in parking lots became, a very hot ticket. At Ruckus, what we did is we actually worked with our existing customers who we knew already were familiar with Ruckus products, and we donated hundreds of Wi-Fi, actually a couple thousand Wi-Fi access points to help enable that, right? They waived the gift rule under E-rate, which allowed us as a manufacturer to gift outdoor access points to schools because this was the triage. Immediately, though, we started getting feedback from schools saying, this is great. However, not all my students can necessarily have their parents drive them to the parking lot and sit in the parking lot all day. So it was a stopgap measure, but the next step that we started seeing is, well, how can we bring the Wi-Fi to the students in areas that they can't come? So we had worked with a number of schools where we started to put Wi-Fi on their buses. They couldn't use the buses to bring them students to school at the time. The schools were still closed. So we were putting an LTE router on the bus that connects to the cellular service in the community, and then outdoor Wi-Fi access points to broadcast that service up to 300 or more meters away from that bus. This image is a great example of that, right? So students were immediately overwhelming their family's data plan because they are now basically stuck inside, online, all day long, using all the data, right? So this was a way for schools to help unburden their families, either those who don't have any connectivity or who could not afford to increase their data caps during the pandemic. So this was great. Now we were bringing the Wi-Fi to the students. But now schools are going to reopen. What's going to happen to those buses? They can't just stay there parked, right? They're going to be back in use. And so what we're seeing next is schools taking on the role of becoming a service provider and basically saying, if I have capacity here, well, what if I could broadcast this to the communities around me? This is being worked through different legislation. Different states have different rules, but thankfully it looks as if this is going to be something that moving forward will become far more common, including here in California. And we've already have a few school districts who are deploying different technologies to do this, both Wi-Fi by putting them around the borders of their campus to simply bleed out into the school, into the neighboring communities, as well as what is known as CBRS, Citizens Broadband Radio Service. And what that really is a fancy term for is private LTE service or private cellular service. So just like Verizon and AT&T and T-Mobile have their own cellular services, so too can a school. A school in this picture, as you see, is this particular school, I believe is in Texas, has mounted their own LTE radios onto a cellular antenna on campus, and they broadcast their service to the community around them. And so this is increasingly a more common request that we're starting to see. And we support that at CommScope as well. CommScope is a major manufacturer of small cells and cell towers and CBRS equipment. So we have a number of case studies that we've done that you can find on our website that I won't go into today, describing how we have helped school districts use these types of technologies to extend their connectivity to students in the surrounding community. The last one is something like short-term fixed wireless. So this was, again, something that we could put out in the community. And what it is inside that small little box that you see is a generator, gas-powered generator. That generator is able to then power up the access points, the Wi-Fi or LTE access points on a telescopic pole that raises up. And now you just have pop-up connectivity. One of the radios can mesh or connect back to a main building or facility so that you're extending an existing network. Or you can physically park this outside of a place that has indoor Wi-Fi or an indoor network connection. We worked with a few retail stores that allowed us to plug into their local networks and then put these in parking lots where students could come and connect in rural areas that didn't have any other option. And by the rules of the pandemic, they were not allowed to open those stores, right? But now you can have pop-up Wi-Fi anywhere in the community, whether it's for a vaccination site or whether it's for a student learning center. All of these things are possible, right? So these are some interesting use cases to solve some of those basic connectivity needs, because without connectivity, you really can't do a whole lot, online. And these are a few examples of those products that we just described. I won't go into any details here, other than short to say that we have a huge, broad portfolio of wireless connectivity solutions that we're happy to share with you. So the foundation, as you see in these pictures, is the cabling. Without the cabling, you're very limited in what you can do and where, because even wireless technologies ultimately terminate on a wire. So we encourage people to look at what their wiring foundation looks like, and then extend that out with wireless technologies from there. As you've seen, we're able to not only help students at home by expanding the footprint of coverage, connecting people in communities as well as on the campus, right? So we have connectivity solutions both for all of these three kind of scenarios, whether it's the pop-up Wi-Fi you're going to put in a temporary location, whether it's indoor or outdoor Wi-Fi in your school campus, or whether it's a community and public Wi-Fi solution that's in concert with your local county and city, or as the school district is going to put some towers on as well to extend that out to the home. As well as with the Cloud Path solution, you can just send them a link. It's all cloud-based as well, right? So we're trying to make sure that we're providing the options. The most successful schools in solving digital equity challenges I've seen don't take one approach. There's multiple approaches, because there is, to date, there is still no silver bullet that solves this for everyone all the time. So it's enough about products. What I'm really excited about sharing with you all today is that we've just gone through an E-rate cycle. Many of you maybe have filed for E-rate, and that's fantastic. And hopefully you're tackling some of those challenges you've already seen that I just described. But there's many approaches that that we might be seeing federal funding to help solve, right? That E-rate does not yet cover due to eligibility limitations and different rules around the E-rate program. So we have developed a program within Ruckus CommScope that will really help you tap into these. And so this is just to give an idea of, we see all of these big funding programs, all of these big, the emergency relief plan, we see the all these different government funding subsidies that are coming out outside of the E-rate program. For K-12 and primary ed, there are huge numbers, right? And this isn't it. There's more coming, and we know that there's more in the pipeline. But it becomes extremely complex in terms of, well, how do I apply? What am I eligible for? Which funds should I apply for which of my needs to make sure I'm maximizing my budget and I'm not squandering it and locking myself down so that when the next one comes out, I'm not going to be able to take advantage of that. So as you can see, there are different deadlines to apply. Those deadlines keep changing too. They've extended some of them. Some of them are nebulous in the sense of, with the Emergency Broadband Act, when the White House declares the end of the pandemic, that $7.2 billion, you have 12 months to apply and receive that $7.2 billion at the end of that emergency, so that we don't even yet know what the deadline is. My point is that it's complicated and it's a constantly moving target. Unless you have a very dedicated, CBO, a business office at your school district who can stay on top of all of this, it can be very difficult. So what we're offering is, we want to help connect you to identify funding resources through this completely free program. We've partnered with a national grant organization called the Grant Office. Right? Pretty simple, generic name, but they do exactly that. They are a grant office. They serve as your grant office, and they're a consulting company that Ruckus has brought on in order to become a resource to our K-12 schools. So we help you identify, first of all, what funding is available and understand what you can do with it. We will help walk you through the application process, because we find that those who have worked with a grant writing organization have a far higher success rate in the grants that they submit, because they know what to look out for. They know how to word things in the way that they are being reviewed and audited for success. And then finally, we will support that end-to-end to make sure that when you have applied, that it meets your needs, and that we can make sure that what you're receiving then is deployed in the way that the grant is authorized, and that the grant is then subsidized, that you are paid for what you need to be paid for, right? So as you'll see in the bottom of this slide, there's an email address, public-funding-support, kind of long, but at CommScope.com. And this is a distribution list. So we have a whole team of people at CommScope watching this and are ready to serve and help you. What does this look like? Well, the first thing is that we're going to send you a information collection tool. It's going to basically ask you some basics around what it is you currently are doing, where your greatest needs are, the right details that we need in order to help you develop a plan. Step two is we're going to deliver this customized plan specifically for your school district. Based on what you've told us, here are the solutions that we think you can employ to meet the goals that you've told us that you have set forth. We will do this within 24 hours. A consultant will be assigned to your application, and begin working on it. And then within 7 days, we will deliver this report. So it's a fast turnaround of a very customized report you can then share with your school board, with your teachers, and with your families, with your, anybody that needs to see it, your superintendent. And then they can evaluate it. The second half of this is, once they do, they agree to join a call with us so we can walk through it, and we can help discuss what are some of these solutions specifically. So again, we're going to help you figure out what your needs and problems are and turn those into a fundable solution, and ultimately get you deliver that to you all the way through, and make sure that what you get meets your needs. We do have a microsite. We will publish, and you can see there on the public-funding-support at CommScope.com. They will receive that email from you, and we will help send you this link to our microsite that has flyers, more description of the program, details and background of all this. We have, again, full-time people assigned to this, ready to help you with it. So with that, I'm going to pause here and we'll see if we have some questions. Hopefully I shared some information that was interesting, and happy to answer any questions that you all have today.
Yeah, that was great, Eric. I mean, having that kind of help for the funding sources is amazing. I think that, our heads just spin when we hear about all these billions of dollars and coming from all these different resources, all these different sources, and having a free service that helps people figure that out is just amazing. And hopefully people can get the resources they need to really help this distance learning and equity issue resolve at least some of it. We know we can't solve all of it, but it's that's really great. I don't see any questions yet. If you have any questions, you want to type them in the chat, now's the time. And I'm sure Eric has his contact information at the end as well, and you can always reach out to us and we'll get you connected if you think of questions afterwards.
Yeah, you can also find me on LinkedIn. I also love to connect via LinkedIn just because it's a great place, and you can find me there. I share lots of information, and you can feel free to reach me there as well. And I will tell you that organizationally, CommScope, the reason we were able to fund this program with the grants office is that the CEO of the company has taken a very personal interest in making sure that we're participating, as I said, not just at helping students connect at home, but also in the community and within schools. He takes our digital equity, our responsibility as an organization. Our number one responsibility is connectivity. It's what we do. And so he has taken it upon himself to say that we will invest in both time and energy and resources to help tackle that problem. And so I'm very proud of the company themselves to really step forward and say, we're going to invest in this and make these resources available. And we recognize how complicated it is to file for a lot of these things. So definitely take advantage of the resources. There's no obligation to you to buy anything from us. We just want to make sure that we help schools figure out a plan and how to tap the money that's available.
Yeah, that's great. If we could get all the ISPs to do that same commitment, we'd have an amazing amount of connections. So
I'm hoping a little of the pressure of, we have a lot of really talented folks in California, in particular in IT. And I think that these IT folks are going to find solutions. And if the carriers and service providers want to remain competitive in these communities, they're going to realize that they need to step up. So I think the competitive nature of that the service providers have are going to force them to hopefully expand their networks. So I see a bright future. I'm very optimistic about what we have ahead.
I do like your optimism. I like it a lot. I think we need to hang on to that for sure. Well, thank you so much. It looks like you did such a good job with your information. We don't have any questions. So really appreciate, again, CommScope putting on this webinar for us. It has been recorded and will be made available to all of our members. And thanks so much again, Eric.
Thank you, Andrea.